I mean, that has been actually the abiding thing that I've always talked about since I started doing this, and very often with Antonio Urso, was humanizing the athletes. Because so many of them have a fantastic story. There's a couple of athletes I know of their background. They were taken off the streets. They were orphans, and they ended up being absolutely fantastic world championship medalists.
Hi, Brian. It's my pleasure to have you on Evidence Strong Show. If you could briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah, Brian Oliver. I work now for the IWF website, but in the past, I was a bit of an enemy of the IWF, you could say, because I worked for a website called Insight to Games, which was prominent in reporting all the bad things that happened in weightlifting in the past 10 to 15 years. I started in sports journalism on a couple of big English newspapers and was sports editor of one of them. When it got taken over by another newspaper and the best job in the world turned bad, and I ended up leaving, resigned, and went to work for London 2012. I knew I'd have a job there, didn't know what it would be. It ended up being as the weightlifting media manager simply because I had attended a famous session at the 1996 Olympic Games. And I enjoyed that a lot, and the sport was so corrupt and newsy, full of doping and corruption and all sorts of things, as well as being very exciting. So I stayed with it, and in my freelance career mostly did weightlifting and used to go to loads of football, cricket, rugby matches, etc. But now I still go to football for personal enjoyment, but weightlifting is the only sport I actually go to professionally. That was a bit of a long introduction. You'll have to edit that.
No, that's okay. So it's 10 plus years you covering weightlifting. You said why you started, but why have you stayed?
I stayed because I haven't been a weightlifting expert who does journalism. I've been a quite senior journalist who liked weightlifting, and the news in weightlifting was just off the scale compared to some other sports, the things that were happening. And I got to know quite a lot of people. I enjoyed it every time I went to a competition. I got to know more and more people. Still really like going. And although I've had a bit of a wobble in the past year when I thought I might stop, the World Championships in Norway were so good, I'll keep going until Los Angeles Olympics.
Because of what you've said, maybe we will go to the biggest changes over the years you've been involved in commenting on weightlifting. What were the biggest changes? Which ones you think were done well and which were big mistakes?
Well, the first thing I'd say is there have been nowhere near enough changes. For example, one of the big points made by Antonio Urso was that the press out rule should change. The officiating should change. And there's no real sign of that happening. And by the way, that's sort of a misnomer. It isn't the press out rule that needs to change. It's the bending and extending rule. But I'll come to that again later. The changes that have happened, by far the biggest thing, was recovering from having 3 presidents in 2 days in 2020 when everything was really bad, to winning favor back from the IOC and being retained for Paris, and then get the go-ahead for Los Angeles, and even getting the 2 extra places after it was 5+5, now it's 6+6. All of that was great. The other things that were particularly good, the thing, I suppose the big thing I've noticed is the growth of women's weightlifting during that period, which has definitely been bigger, I would say, in terms of achievement than in men's weightlifting. And one thing I especially remember was going to Iran in 2018 and seeing an 8-year-old girl on a platform when the local soldiers tried to stop her coming in because women weren't allowed. But this was the event where they were, and finally Iran allowed women to do weightlifting, which they had never done before. And even this week in the Islamic Solidarity Games, Iran's women won a couple of medals, and that's very good. And it is slowly happening all around the Gulf because Qatar also won the super heavyweights in the women in the Islamic Solidarity Games, and that is also a landmark achievement. Then, from a personal point of view, going to China in 2019 for about a week, just being taken around to primary schools, to bigger schools, to the state or province training center, meeting the greatest coach, one of the best scientific analysts, and so on, and just learning with a translator all the time. Anybody would speak to me. It was just fascinating learning a lot about how things work in China. Obviously, seeing a lot of the best weightlifters like Deng Wei, Liu Xiaojun, Soran Baradi, Katarina Li Wenwen, Yin, and all this, that's all great. But from a wider perspective, it was the women, the China, and the thing I'd like to say that the biggest story definitely is transgender issues in weightlifting, because weightlifting was the one sport that had the most visible transgender presence with Laura Hubbard. But people go on and on and on about it, but there won't ever be another one, in my view. And there was a story in a British newspaper last week in the Daily Mail about how transgender weightlifters are not blocked from competing in the Commonwealth Games. Well, it was just ridiculous, because how many are there? There are none. I reckon by the time I die, there won't be one more, because they can't get in now. So
Looking back the 13 years of involvement, what do you think were the biggest mistakes?
well, they were all political. There was this thing, the old guard versus the reformers, which I expect you know about. There were the people in control, and they didn't change or stick to the constitution. And to be honest, sometimes they still don't. They didn't welcome the investigation by McLaren into the corruption, which is understandable because they were the people being investigated. But they weren't going to stop that. Once it started, they should have just sort of capitulated, really. It was the game was up, but it went on and dragged on. And it was really, when Ursula Papandreou came in as interim president, wow, it was tough. And there was that time when they really did have 3 presidents in 2 days. And it was just a mess. It really was. It was all political. Everything they did wrong was a result, as it always is, of people wanting to stay in power when it's time to go. And really, the biggest consequence of that, or that sort of trying to protect themselves, is that they didn't look ahead. They weren't changing the things that needed to change. That might be to do with presentation or rules or whatever. It wasn't on the agenda, because they were completely consumed by protecting themselves. So that's overwhelmingly the worst things that happen.
Because you know what I'm thinking? Okay, there are problems and so on, but kicking out the sport out of Olympics is a very hard, because the sport is not only the leadership at the top of the organization. These are committees for each country. These are athletes and their families. And in Australia, I can choose to be elite weightlifter, and I support myself and I support my passion for the sport and my competition. But there are countries that take kids through the system, and the kids end up being professional athletes who are on salary, governmental salary. So are their families. So if the sport is kicked out of the Olympics, all the countries that have systems will not have these systems. So all the athletes will have to find other jobs and so on. So it seems like a very harsh treatment for the sport and the athletes.
Absolutely. Very harsh, and you're punishing the wrong people. So, as you say, these systems, for example, in China, Romania, Iran, wherever they exist, the funding is there, the system is there. Colombia is another one. Okay, they've had doping problems in the past, a lot of these places, but it's much better to overcome those problems, to clean up if you can and keep things going, than it is to kick out all the people who are not responsible for the bad governance and the corruption higher up. Absolutely. I mean, you never know for sure. It's possible that it was all part of a strategy anyway. Just keep threatening them, and eventually they will go, even if that maybe they never would have kicked weightlifting out, but they certainly behaved as if they would, and they had grounds to do it as well. Even if it was unfair, they could have done it. But I would also say at this point that weightlifting has taken a hell of a lot of flack, quite rightly, but other sports also have bad doping, and they don't seem to have any image problem whatsoever. Like, look how many, everybody knows people are doping in athletics, in cycling. Cycling doesn't particularly have a bad reputation, but what about judo, wrestling, boxing, etc.? If you look at the WADA reports and the percentage of positive tests, they're not wildly different to weightlifting. They don't often carry out anywhere near as many tests. But weightlifting is sort of painted as the bad boy, if you like. But if the statistics don't really show that to be the case, or at least there are lots of bad ones, not just one.
And athletics, for example, had huge doping scandals in the past too. And I think they went on punishing the specific people who were responsible. Not the treatment was not kicking out the whole sport out of Olympics.
No, they couldn't do that because it's the biggest sport in the Olympics. But then another thing positive about weightlifting is look at how many members it's got. It must be, after athletics, I should know this, but it must be in a top 3 or 4 in terms of world spread.
You mean like how many world countries are associated?
Yeah. Not just how many countries are members. That's not really a solid fact because a lot of the members don't actually have any weightlifters. They're just there because they're a vote. But they do have actively a heck of a lot of member federations. They have an enormous spread of medal winners. You look at which continents, which countries the Olympic Games and World Championships medalists come from. It's way more diverse, if you like, than other sports, way more. And that's another good thing. It isn't really a particularly expensive sport to do. And I would say if you compare it to boxing, I know women's boxing's growing, but I would think women's weightlifting is in a much stronger position, for example, than women's boxing. It's more established. It's just, I don't know, it's been around longer. So I suppose that's what it is.
Yeah, that and rise of CrossFit changes a little bit also in how women are perceived and how women's body is perceived and how much freedoms women have. Freedoms in a sense that it's this push to equal participation in sports and so on. So that's an opportunity, and I think weightlifting used this opportunity pretty all right in many countries.
Oh, absolutely. If I listed all my current favourite weightlifters, I reckon there would be 80% women at least, and from all parts of the world. And I have the utmost respect for all weightlifters and coaches that what they do is unbelievably difficult. Well done to them for doing it. But that some of what particular women do is just, it's amazing. You know, Aiglo from Iceland, I don't know if you know her, she's top 10. She is studying to be a doctor at the same time that she's one of the top 10 weightlifters in the world. 7 years of study. I think that's stunning. And then I wrote some names down earlier.
Yeah, let's go there. Tell me your favorite weightlifters and why they are your favorite.
Olivia Reeves, just unbelievable for so many 6 from 6. So she's the best, probably the best female weightlifter, I think, in the time that I've been involved in the sport. And she just does a little smile, skips off the pluff, and she's just done something. And I actually now, one of the great things that I enjoy now is that the people from North Korea actually speak to me, and privately and very occasionally for publication. And
So do you speak in English?
one of them does. He was very honest about Olivia Reeves. He said that, they wanted to take her on at the World Championships. She went to a different weight category. The athlete that would have competed against her, Song Kuk-yang, was it, I think, she broke world record. But even then, he said, still, I'm not sure we would have beaten Olivia Reeves. Well, who would? Who did recently? She's outstanding. Then Maud Sharon, Heidelin Diaz, Solfrid from Norway, qualified electrician who becomes an Olympic champion. I think that's fantastic. Emily Campbell in Britain also. What you were saying about women's bodies and image, she's great in promoting women's weightlifting. And then further back, Denwei, and I really love Ri Song-gum, the one from North Korea now, 48 kilos. She's just phenomenal. So, and of the younger ones, I think Charlotte Simoneau from Canada, she's also going to be very good. But then there are so many. Look at how many they produced. The new one who changed from Colombia to Bahrain, Ingrid Vanessa Segura, she is still a junior, and she's going to be very, very good also. I love watching young ones who you just know they're going to be good. So going to Youth World Championships and Junior World Championships sometimes, in 1 or 2 years, it might be better than going to the Senior World Championships, because you see people and you think, wow, that's very impressive. And you see countries as well that are changing. For example, India. Okay, nobody's heard of many of their lesser or younger athletes at the moment, but they're almost doing like China. They're putting a lot of money in. They're doing a lot of talent ID. They're getting kids aged 10, 11, 12. They've already got loads aged 16, 17, 18 because they want to bid for the Olympic Games in 2036. And it's impressive. They're doing really well. Of the men, I shouldn't forget the men. My favourite weightlifter of all time is probably Precious McKenzie, who most people have never heard of, who didn't ever win at the Olympic Games, but he was the first person in any sport to win 4 gold medals at the Commonwealth Games, and he became quite a friend of the Queen in England and the royal family. And when he was an infant, his mother was an alcoholic. His dad got killed by a crocodile. He fell in a cesspit and nearly drowned in human excrement. And then he was a victim of extreme racism of apartheid in South Africa. He escaped, went to Britain, and he fought at 10, and he's just a fantastic man. There should have been a film about him. They said he's amazing. Of the more recent ones, obviously Lasha Soramaradi, Lu Xiaojun, etc., and Carlos Nassar now. The most uplifting thing lately, one of the best stories since I've been doing this, was meeting John Mao from Germany in Norway and hearing about his experiences, because he was returning after 2.5, 3 years away because he had cancer and he had 6 months of chemo and he had Hodgkin's lymphoma. He could have died, and he would recover from that, and there he was at the World Championships, and he's back in business, which is just fantastic.
It comes across that you think that athletes should be put first, which I actually agree with.
Yeah.
How do you think it could be done?
Well, the people on the IWF board need to be more open to what athletes think. And they're there, they have a presence, but I'm not sure they do. And the way in which they would make the biggest difference, in my view, is to do with the rules. So this happened in Norway as well. You could see it. There was one athlete from North Korea who lost a world record, but won the gold anyway, on deliberate oscillation. And there was a lot of controversy, a lot of talk about that. Well, and I know also that Carlos Nassar was told before he lifted that if you do it again, you'll get a no lift because he does it. And I think that's perfectly fair. Oscillation is a deliberate attempt to gain an advantage, so you shouldn't do it. But all this bending and extending, it's not deliberate. If you're lifting 100 or 200 kilos up above your head and your arms make minute movements involuntarily, which they do, you're not seeking to gain an advantage. And I think they should change the rules. I don't know exactly how. There are people who know a lot more about this than I do, but bending it and extending, or the press out rule, it causes a lot of trouble. It really does. And this is what Antonio Urso was talking about. He's now left, but in 2022 and 2023, that you've got to simplify the rules. And the one thing would change is if you could have, I don't know if you could just write it into the rules or just have it as an attitude, is to give the athlete the benefit of the doubt, which never happens. The rule book gets the benefit of the doubt every time. And when there's it's just a tiny little movement. Nobody's trying to cheat. Nobody's trying to gain anything. And yet it's a no lift. And all this has come to light really since video replays. All sports rules were invented by humans for humans with human eyesight. But no, you've got more than human eyesight. And philosophically, I think that's questionable. If you have a replay, play it at normal speed, because that's what the human eye sees. That's what the audience sees. Giving the athletes the benefit of the doubt in rules would make a big difference, but also little things like the weigh-in and just organizational balls-ups. Like in the African Championships about 3 years ago, they had a platform that was moving all over the place. It was just terrible, dangerous. At the Islamic Solidarity Games, which have just finished in Riyadh, they had only 4 indoor platforms for the training. The others, they had to go outdoors. Well, why? And then the uniform allowance, that was a big unnecessary row. That common sense, they could have sorted that out straight away. Then again, with the weigh-in, you get complaints from referees as well as athletes. You've got to go to the competition venue 2 hours before the first session for your weigh-in. Suppose the first session's at 9 o'clock. You've got to be there at 7 a.m. Why can't you have the weigh-in in the hotel where the athletes are staying? And if there are 3 hotels, have it in 3, or just have it in the one with the most athletes. And then you haven't got to do all this traveling. And then there are other things. So, for example, there is a super heavyweight from Pakistan who allied himself with somebody in the federation against the wishes of the president of the federation. And for political reasons, he got dropped. He won the gold medal at the Commonwealth Games. He was a potential, world championships top 10 or something. They just kicked him out because for political reasons. I think that is instances like that, again, give the athlete the benefit of the doubt. Somebody should be able to step in and do something about that, especially the Athletes Commission. Another example, there's a woman, Maddie Ndake, who now competes for Britain, who was competing for Cameroon. She won a bronze medal at the Olympic Games in London 2012 on a disqualification for doping. She's never got her medal because she was over here when it was sent to Cameroon. Where is it? The president of the Cameroon Federation is on the IWF board. Can't he just deliver this medal? No. Well, again, the Athletes Commission for something like that should just immediately get involved and get her medal. And that sort of thing doesn't happen. And also Athletes Commissions, which are fantastic, they can become as political as other commissions and committees and the executive board and so on, and that's not a good thing. I think it happened recently in Europe. I shouldn't, again, be too negative because it's good, and you can't say every athlete is going to be a contributor to change, is going to have good opinions well expressed. But overall, there's still a long way to go to get athletes and to some extent coaches involved more in certain decisions, particularly about rules.
I think traditionally that was how it was. There was a decision about the rules changes or weight class changes for that matter. And everyone else had to scramble to adjust. And even for the before Tokyo 2018 change of weight classes, and from there was 3 other weight classes, recent one just 2 weeks ago. For athletes who are developing, weightlifting is not a sport that you train for 6 weeks. You need years to prepare for Olympics or for Worlds, for medaling at the senior elite events. If you changed weight classes frequently, it's very hard for the athletes to aim at optimal development for where they want to go, because it changes so quickly. So, and no one is asking athletes what they think about it. And if athletes are voicing, that no one is listening. So,
well, that's not actually true because they do. They can't ratify those weight classes until the Athletes Commission approves them. But that's at the end of the process, not the beginning. There will be some athlete involvement, but there's nowhere near enough widespread consultation on weight classes, qualifying programs, etc. I don't think data analysis is something that's particularly hot at the top of the IWF. So, but if you had a lot of input from scientists on really basic things like average body weight and physique in different countries and different continents, and what's a safe percentage to increase from one body weight category to the next body weight category, and so on and so on. One of the athletes in this most recent decision about weight categories for Los Angeles from Germany had carried out some investigations. And she kept trying to contact the Athletes Commission, but then she couldn't reply. But she did in the end, and everything she said made sense. You've got to go more with science, and you've got to have more consultation. But it isn't even just science and physique and the human body. It's also important for broadcasters, for people that pay the money to the sport. It's important to all sorts of stakeholders, and I don't know if that really happens, that everybody has a say.
but
Certainly,
even if not everyone is able to take part in decision, if it is done in visible way that people have time to adjust and speak up and good points are brought up, then wouldn't it make the decision better? Wouldn't it make it more informed and better for, I guess, as always, it will involve some politics and so on, but I think it could be balanced a little bit better.
yeah, for sure. When you think about weightlifting as a whole, this must be one of the top 3 most important things in the sport. And yet it's decided by a committee who then put their findings to the board, and then they ratify it. It is, as you say, it's all a bit close. Okay, there are lots of things that happen. There are technical regulations, which hotel you're going to stay at, how big your logo can be in your uniform, whatever. There are all sorts of regulatory decisions that don't need to be out in the public. But when it comes to this, it would be good if it was more visible, for sure.
How to make it better with the use of media?
Well, that wouldn't be easy because it's barely had any media presence on a global scale in all the time I've been involved in it. So there will be people writing seriously about weightlifting in China, and it does get a lot of coverage in certain countries like Iran, Armenia, whatever, and Colombia. But look at USA Weightlifting, fantastic organization, done a great job, but how much mainstream media coverage does it get for athletes? Not a lot. And also, inside the games where I worked was taken over by who knows, Russians probably, and they stopped covering weightlifting about just over 2 years ago. They've just started again, but they don't go to events. It's not really credible. So therefore, you end up with what you've got. You've got, as you've always had, Hook Grip, All Things Gym, and I have a lot of respect for them. They do a good job. They're important. They do promote the sport. Everybody knows them. Then you've had Weightlifting House come along, and this is all videos, pretty much. That's what people want. It's allied to selling products, which, if that's what you need for their presence, then that's what you have. And I'd say definitely Weightlifting House has taken the video content, the little documentaries and so on, to another level in the past year or so, which is good. But it is, as it's always going to be now, all social media. And again, that's good because individuals can have their own big presence. But there are drawbacks. Well, there has been quite a discussion, that, including by the Athletes Commission, that too many weightlifters now are more interested in filming themselves in training and putting themselves up on social media than they are in winning competitions. But that's a subject for discussion, I should think. But what I would say is that social media is good for the sport, obviously, and a lot of good changes have come since it. But the social media presence, a big social media presence, doesn't equate to talent, and it doesn't equate to newsworthiness. And I do think sometimes that some particularly young lifters don't really get a mention, don't get a look in on some of the platforms. For example, when you're previewing a championships, some don't get a mention, and they're obviously going to be medal contenders, but they don't have a big social media presence, if any. And there was a good example of that in Norway, where the Egyptian Abdo Yunus was, the next big thing in weightlifting, but he hadn't really won anything yet, and he didn't win anything in Norway except bronze medal. And he is going to be very good, but it's because of social media he was presented in that way, because he was telling people, I'm that good. Well, come on, become the world champion first. And then I would say China and North Korea are sort of still underplayed. So I could name, take for example, Albert de los Santos from the Philippines. He has a presence here and there, and he's exceptionally good, but he's not really talked about, for example, as a medal contender. I think he will be. And then in the United States, Colby Ferguson and Aaron Williams get a lot of airtime, if you like. Caden Cahoy, who I would say has got a good chance of being top 6 in Los Angeles, maybe a medal, I don't know. He doesn't get much. I don't know how it all works exactly, and of course it's all subjective anyway. The presentation of the whole competition has to be better. If Weightlifting House can present those very good videos away from the platform, if you like, in training, little interviews while somebody's having a meal, whatever, you ought to be able to jazz it up in the competition and have a lot more competition content. But the competitions aren't jazzed up. There's too much dead time. There's often no crowd there, or very small crowd. That's another point, going off tangent, but the difference between a competition with a big crowd in and a competition with no crowd in is immeasurable. It really is. When you've got a lot of noise, for an example, in the 2023 European Championships in Yerevan in Armenia, it was nearly full or full all the time. There were 1,000 people couldn't get in for the super heavyweights, 6,000 people in there a lot of the time. It was fantastic. And also, of course, any Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games is full. All the tickets are sold. It was great. And the presentation at the Birmingham 2022 Commonwealth Games was fantastic, with all the two people buzzing around the audience, all the audience engagement. They were interviewing ex-athletes, interviewing people in the crowd. That was really exemplary. And the IWF leadership was there, and they could see how good it was, but nothing really has happened since then.
So what I'm hearing is that you're craving some storytelling, which is very hard to do in a very short social media format. If we think reels or shorts, where you have 30 seconds, maybe to a minute, and that's it. So it's very hard to show the depth of the stories of the athletes and coaches and teams and rivalries between countries and between particular athletes in the weight class or whatever. It's hard.
That has been actually the abiding thing that I've always talked about since I started doing this, and very often with Antonio and Urso, was humanizing the athletes, because so many of them have a fantastic story. There's a couple of athletes I know of their background. They were taken off the streets. They were orphans, and they ended up being absolutely fantastic world championship medalists. But either A, they don't want to talk about it, or B, their federation doesn't want them to talk about it, and C, overriding all this, it seems as if nobody in the sport is aware of how good it would be for the sport for them to tell their story and be more human, if you like. And then this comes down again in the presentation. How much is the audience told about an athlete during the competition, or either on screen or by the speaker? It's difficult for the speaker, but a lot of information could go on the screen. They can pick their favorite song. They could talk about their dog or whatever. Doesn't matter. They just could be humanized in a way they're not.
We have 10 minutes after presentation before the first athlete. This could be used to introduce athletes.
The 10 minutes of death, that is just, they'll introduce the technical officials, and then nothing happens for 10 minutes. I mean, it's just unbelievable. People there was somebody who came in to work for the Norwegian Federation who's gone since. It was an international referee in football and ice hockey. And he was what is this? What's going on here? Couldn't believe it. And then sometimes you go to a B group, there's 6 athletes, there's 8 referees, or members and referees deciding on a good lift or no lift. And there are actually more officials than there are athletes by a factor of about 3 or 4. It's just unbelievable. It really is. But that was another thing. The number why, when you've got a video, have you got 8 people deciding whether it's a good lift or a no lift? 8 people. It's off the scale. That's crazy.
Let's finish on something positive. So what would be your message for coaches and for lifters? Message from Brian Oliver.
Keep up the good work and try to get more of a say in your sport. And you're all fantastic.
All right. I have 2 questions to finish, 2 short questions. The first one usually is, what is your favorite lift, snatch or clean and jerk? And I know that you are not a lifter yourself, but you must have your favorite lift.
Well,
surely.
It's interesting because for technique, the snatch, for strength, clean and jerk. So it's 2 different things in a way. But yeah, it's got to be the clean and jerk, because that's the killer lift where you get the world record and the Olympic gold medal. So, but I do like watching, for example, Lessman Paradise. That's it.
The last question is where people can find you online if they want to follow what you're doing.
Well, mostly you go on a Google search and find something from a few years ago. But nowadays, the only place where I appear, my reports appear regularly anyway, is competition reports on the IWF website. So for every youth, junior and senior world championships and the Olympic Games, I'll be there hopefully for Grand Prix, etc. Anything part of qualifying for Los Angeles. And also I do put other information that might not necessarily appear on the IWF website, occasionally on the Reddit group. I don't know if you know the Reddit group, but it's big, 270,000 people, I think. Most of that is videos of people doing lifts, but a little bit of it is news.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Pleasure to meet you and talk to you today.
Thanks.